It's time for a quiz. I want y'all to tell me what is the difference between an heir, a child, and a descendant when it comes to property, inheritance laws, estate laws, things like that. Today, we're going to be talking about vocabulary when it comes to legal terms. A lot of times, when clients come to me, they have a certain understanding about a particular word based on how people commonly understand it. And a lot of times, that understanding can differ from the legal definition. We have what are called legal terms of art. And so these are words that may be everyday words that we use, but they have a different meaning when it comes to the law. And the way that those different meanings are they come about might be from the statutes, so federal or state statutes. Those terms of arts can be defined by case law. And there also could just be words that in common practice as attorneys we use them, and then everybody in the legal sense has a certain understanding of those words. So it's very important that you know that there are some words that you may think of it as meaning one thing, but when you're talking to your lawyer or presenting to a court, then it has a totally different meaning. So we're going to start with the words heir, descendant, and child. This one comes up a lot and it becomes an issue when we use the words loosely and interchange them. So an heir is a person, and well, let me say this. Let me go back and say this. Heirs, an heir, Heir. Sometimes people will, well, it's not people, but sometimes it will be stated as heir at law, heir at law. So that would be defined by the law. That means that we will look at the state law for the state that a particular person lived in before they died, and then we will see who their heirs are. Even when I say that, I'm realizing that the word heir is different from the word child in the sense that you don't have heirs until you die. So nobody listening to this recording has any heirs right now. We all are living, and that means that we don't have any heirs at this time. We may have children, we may even have descendants, but we don't have heirs because heirs don't come about until a person dies. When you have children, children are the people who come from you. However, it's also important to note that there are legal children, and then there are children that may not be yet considered legal. Sometimes we use the word putative child, which means that we believe that it's your child, but there's no legal connection between you and the child. So in the state of Georgia, if a woman gives birth to a child, then that's going to be considered her biological child and her legal child. However, a man may not, they may, sire a child or contribute to a child being born, but unless they are legally married to the woman when she gives birth, or they go through a court process to legitimate the child, then that child may be their biological child, but not their legal child. And so here we are with the words heir and the words not descendant. I didn't even get the descendant yet. Slow down, Veronica. We have the word heir and we have the word child. And people might think the people who come from me, they're my heirs and my children. But legally, that could be very different. So we have to be mindful that heirs are determined by one, being deceased, and then two, who are the people who are your heirs at the time of your death. So let me explain that a little bit further. Here in Georgia, your heirs at law or your heirs are the people who are those heirs at the time of your death. That's going to be if you are married and you have children, your heirs will be your spouse and your children. If you are not married but you do have children, your heirs are your children. If you are married and you don't have children, your heir is your spouse. So you can see very clearly there the difference between heir and child, because an heir can include your spouse. If you don't have a spouse or children, then things get a little bit more tricky. Your heirs could be your parents. Your heirs could be your grandparents, your brothers and sisters. They could be your nieces and nephews. It could be your aunts and uncles, your cousins, your first cousin, second cousin, third cousin. So it really, and even that first, second, third cousin, y'all, we've been using it all wrong. There's first cousin once removed, second cousin twice removed. All those different ways of defining the degrees of what they call it, sanguinity, consanguinity. Anyway, that's what happens when I try to use words that I'm not familiar with. I think it's consanguinity, but nobody says that anymore unless you're like in court. But so you see that your heirs could be very different. It depends on who. It's going to be two things. One, what is state law? What's the law of your state? Here in Georgia, I gave you the laws for who your heirs are. But in another state, those people could be a very different group of people. So state to state, the definition of heirs is going to change. Let's see, what did I say? So it's based on state law. Then it's also based on who is around when you die. So like I said, right now none of us have heirs. Our heirs will be determined when we die, and here in Georgia at least, but I would say it makes sense to have this be the case everywhere, so I'm assuming it's the case everywhere. Your heirs are the people who are your heirs at the time of your death, not the day after, not the day before, because that could change. You could be, you could die one day and your spouse and your children are your heirs. Then the next day your spouse could die. Still, your spouse and children are your heirs. And so there might have to be some additional processes that go forth to deal with that situation. But your heirs are your heirs the day that you die. Another thing in terms of children, like we talked about, you have the common way we think about children. These are the people that I contribute to them being here biologically. But then you also have the legal definition where, like I said, a woman, she gives birth to a child. That is her legal child. That's her biological child. A man might have some additional requirements to meet in order for a child to be considered his biological, not his biological child, but his legal child. You also can adopt children, people who are not biologically linked to you, but you have chosen to legally adopt them. Those individuals would be children, just like your birth children, in the sense of the way that the law defines child. Now, let's talk about descendants. That's another one that gets confusing to people. And I had to look up the definition myself to make sure I was clear. Descendants are the people who come from you. They're in your line. So your descendants are your children, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, great great grandchildren. Those are your descendants. And so one thing, when I'm preparing estate plans, we have these these they're not templates, but we have something that we work from. And I often have to adapt it when I have clients who don't have children, because for some reason the forms like default to naming a person's descendants as being the ones to inherit in certain situations. But if you don't have children, then or grandchildren or great grandchildren, you don't have any descendants. So you can have heirs, but you may not have children, and you may not have descendants. And that's very important to note as well, because why is that important, Veronica? Think about it. Why is that important? It is important to note if someone is a descendant versus an heir for a reason that has completely slipped my mind. I'm so sorry, y'all. If it comes back, I'll put it in the description to this video. But it is important for us to keep track of who is a person's heirs, who is a person's descendants, who is a person's children when we are talking about estate law and estate rules. And we have to be very clear on those things. So I guess maybe what I was gonna say is that a person who it's coming back to me now. It's coming back to me now. A person who does not have children, they do not have descendants. However, they do have heirs. And that heirs is again determined based on state law and what are the circumstances at the time of that person's death. One thing I want to make very clear here: a lot of people say, well, they died without heirs. Based on what we just discussed, is that possible? No, it's not possible. It is not possible for someone to have no heirs unless, like, every potential person in their family bloodline is deceased. Their family group, I would say. So the way that Georgia defines heirs is going to be, and let me be clear, that's Georgia law I'm talking about. But the way that Georgia defines heirs, it just goes on and on and on and on. So if you have like fifth cousins 3 times removed, I don't know what that would even mean. But if those people are alive, then they would be your heirs if nobody else before them who's closer to you is alive. So I'm working on a case now where we identified some second cousins once removed as this person's heirs. Now, in this case, they didn't know who the father was. They knew who the mother was, of course, but the father was not on the birth certificate. So he likely had some other cousins on the other side, but we have no way of knowing because we don't even know who the daddy was. But in this case, we had to go and trace all the way to second cousins once removed, which is his mother's brothers and sisters, children's children. Like we got down that far because this person just didn't have a lot of family members. But people say he didn't have any heirs. No, he had heirs. He just didn't have children. He just didn't have descendants, but he had legal heirs. So I hope that's clear. I'm going to go into another definition situation that we come up with, but I just want to, y'all let me know in the comments if that makes sense and why it's so important that we understand that just because someone, that we understand the difference between child, descendant, and heir. The other situation that I feel like is very important that we look at the definitions is when it comes to land versus estates. This is another issue that a lot of people will get confused about, and they'll come to me and I'm explaining things, and then I realize we're looking at things from two totally different perspectives, and I have to take a step back and explain the way the law defines these terms. So when we talk about land, it might be property, might be a house, whatever it is, it's a tangible piece of real estate that a person owns. If there is some kind of document showing that this person has legal title to that piece of real estate. A lot of times people will, when they're dealing with a family member who has died and that person owns real estate or owns a partial interest in real estate, it comes up particularly in that situation. But the family member will say, they didn't have, let me see how well it would be put. Um, they will see that this person had a will, and they'll say, hey, this person named in the will as the executor, they are the executor over the property. And I have to explain, no, they're not the executor over the property. They are the executor of the estate. The estate is everything that a person owns when they die. So that means if the person had real estate, if they had bank accounts, if they had cars, if they had clothes, personal property, whatever it is that they owned when they died, that will be part of their estate. Now, like I said, a piece of real estate might be in the estate, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that that person have full ownership of that piece of real estate. So in that case, let's say there's a house and half of it is owned by a husband, half of it is owned by a wife. The wife dies. She has a will. The executor of her will might think, I'm the executor of the house. And I have to explain, no, you're not the executor of the house. You are the executor of the wife's estate. And so that means that one half interest in the house that she owned when she died, you have control over that one half interest, but the other half is still owned by the husband, so you don't have full control over the whole house because you're only executor over the estate of that one person who owns half of the house. So it's important to be clear, do you own the house or do you have control over the estate? um, do you have control over the house or do you have control over the estate? Do you have control over the land or do you have control over the estate? Those are two very different things, and it's very important that you are clear. Are we talking about the land, the house, the building, or are we talking about the estate? An estate is not something like that you can touch or look at. It is a um I don't even know how we call it, but it's a way that property is owned by, it's the interest in property that someone owned when they die. So it's hard to like say that that's the estate over there or there's the estate over there. The estate is just everything that this person owned. And so when you become the executor over someone's estate, you have control over everything that they own, but only what they own. So they may own a partial interest in real estate. So that means as executor, you only have control over a partial interest in real estate. So I'm gonna have to do another video on that one because I feel like it's not really clear. Y'all help me out please by putting some comments in the chat to let me know how I can, better what questions you have about that second piece, because I know it probably could use some better explaining. But either way, I really would love to hear what y'all thought about this conversation. I think it's very important that we are very clear. We might be talking about legal definitions versus everyday ways of understanding words, and we have to be clear which one are we using in a particular circumstance. There are others that will come up, and I'll make sure that I do some videos on those as well. If you are an attorney watching this, let me know what other ones you think about that people often confuse so that we can have that conversation even further. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. If you found this video helpful, I hope that you would subscribe to my channel and that you would like this video and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Y'all take care.